quite hard. And so because of all the rain, he decided to get off the street and take a side route and cut through a cemetery. And as this man is walking through the cemetery, not being able to see where he's going, he lands in an empty grave, a deep one. And, he says, oh, okay, I got to get himself out of this. He starts to try and climb out, but it is raining hard. It is way too slippery. And after 10, 20 minutes of trying and yelling out, no one coming, he's like, I'm stuck here for the rest of the night. So he managed to curl up in one corner that's semi-dry and try and get into a fitful sleep. And while he's in there, a couple hours later, another man comes walking through and falls in as well. The man starts yelling, trying to climb out, again is stuck in there, and he doesn't notice the person sleeping in the corner who starts to wake up. He stands up and reaches over and touches him on the shoulder and says, "You're never getting out of this one." The man jumps up 6 feet in the air and runs all the way home. You never expect to find life in a grave. You don't. There's that phrase that we often use that's a well-used phrase, and it's got different meanings to it, and maybe you've used it before, and it's Saved by the Bell. I'm not talking about the TV show, but Saved by the Bell, in our modern context, it means often used with a boxer in a boxing ring. One who's not finishing a round well, and they're getting tired, or taking too many hits, and then the bell rings, and they get to have a little break, a reset, a rest. They're saved by the bell. Also, back when you were in school, and when I was in school, when a class was dragging on, and on, and on, and on, and you look at the clock, and then the bell finally rings, and you have the freedom to get up and go, saved by the bell. But the phrase actually has a more dire and darker origin of where it likely comes from. It's in the 18th and 19th century, when many people were dying from a cholera outbreak. And when this was happening, bodies were being put into city squares, and bodies were piling up. And to try and stop the outbreak of infection, they would cart the bodies out quickly to more remote areas and bury them quickly, which led to the fear of being buried before you were dead, being buried alive. And so they started inventing things called security coffins or safety coffins. And they looked like this. They had a little bell at the top, and it was a string going down into it, and there would be attached to the hand or sometimes the foot, and there would always be someone on graveyard watch in case they heard a ringing bell in the middle of the night. They go, oh, someone was buried by accident. Let's go dig them up. But don't worry, this isn't just in the 18th and 19th century. In 1995, an Italian designer came up with a more updated version of the safety coffin. It looks like this. And it includes an emergency alarm, an intercom system, a flashlight, breathing apparatus, a heart monitor, and best of all, you know what it actually has? A pre-charged smartphone with every popular game to play while you're waiting to be... No, it actually doesn't come with that part. It doesn't come with the smartphone. But the smartphone would be great for killing time, right? Yeah. We don't expect to find life in the grave. We have expectations that are natural, and it just happens. When you open a fridge, you expect it to be cold. When you turn on the kettle, you expect the water to get hot. When you go into a graveyard, you expect it to be devoid of life. And the nature of following Jesus is that he can breathe life into things that we thought not possible, that we thought too far gone. As we're entering into our final sermon on the Jesus in His Own Words sermon series here, we've been looking at different moments where Jesus described who he is, what he does, and in doing so over the last 8 Sundays or so, it's to understand him better and how we relate to him and how we follow him better, and allowing him to say exactly who he was. Now, as we've been going through it, today we come to our final one, and it's at a graveside. It's at a tomb. It's at a moment in time where Jesus is visiting 2 people, and one person has died. There's 2 sisters named Martha and Mary, and their brother Lazarus, who is dying and then dies. And as we go to this text, before Lazarus actually is dead, he's been sick for a while, and Jesus is informed of it. And so this is how Jesus responds when he finds out that Lazarus is dying. We take it up in John 11, verses 3 and 4. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, the Martha and Mary, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." So Jesus gives a prophetic word that there's a sign coming, that something's going to happen to be for God's glory, even though they've been given this dire news around Lazarus being sick and a sickness likely leading to death. Now, if you're familiar with the story, you know that Jesus does end up going there, but it goes there after Lazarus is dead. And then there's a scene at the tomb, and then Jesus, using only his words, calls forth Lazarus, and Lazarus is resurrected from the grave. So that's what ends up happening. And while it's one event, one isolated person coming back to life, it's also a parallel or a foreshadow of what's going to be happening to Jesus soon after, with his own death on the cross and his own resurrection on Easter Sunday. So that's what's starting to play out. There's sort of two storylines happening, two narratives. This first one we're looking at with Lazarus and the sisters, and Jesus going there in a moment. And then there's the narrative of Jesus' own death that's coming and his own resurrection. The late pastor Fred Craddock observes this around the two storylines happening. He says, "The reader, therefore, is alerted to what the characters in the drama do not know. That is, what is really going on here is not only a family crisis in Bethany, where Martha and Mary were, but the crisis of the world. Not only the raising of a dead man, but the giving of life to the world. On one level, the story is about the death and resurrection of Lazarus, but on another, it is about the death and resurrection of Jesus. The sisters want their brother back, to be sure, but Jesus is also acting to give life to the world. So this event that's about to take place is a sign, pointing not just to finding a life in a grave one time, but to finding the source of life for all time. However, with Lazarus dying, sick, Jesus doesn't go there right away. In fact, he stays 2 more days where he's located. And even when he says, tells his disciples, we're going to be going back to Bethany, they kind of push back on it, because last time they're there, some Jewish people tried to kill Jesus. So he says, no, we have to go. And one of the disciples, Thomas, even sarcastically, is like, okay, let's go, everybody. We're going to die with Jesus now. Let's go. So as they arrive, Martha comes out to greet him. And Lazarus has already died. We read this down in, where am I? The next page, that's why. Down in verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." There's a few things to unpack here in this conversation and the timing of it too. In Jewish culture, first century Jewish culture, many believed that after a person died, the spirit of the dead person would hover around the body for 3 days. And then after 3 days, when the body started to change color and decompose, the spirit's like, okay, I guess things are wrapped up, and would check out. So they're saying it's on the 4th day. So Lazarus is dead, right? And as Jesus shows up, Martha confronts him and says, "If you had been here, you're too late." And then she also still has a plea. She still has faith. But even now, I know that God will do whatever you ask. She still has faith, even in the midst of her grief, her disappointment. And Jesus responds by saying, yes, he will rise again. And she takes that as a statement of, yes, I know theologically, when God wraps up human history and all are raised from the dead, Lazarus will be there. But right now, today, it's too late. And have you felt that before, where God was too late? I have. I wanted problems fixed yesterday. I wanted easy decisions in front of me. I wanted relationships to be smoother and more enjoyable. Maybe you wanted a more vibrant, healthy life. You wanted kids and grandkids, and you wanted a career that was meaningful, and things aren't panning the way you thought, and you're like, God, you are showing up late to what I want. And the problem with the promised easy life is that Jesus never promised us an easy life. He promised to give you a meaningful life, one filled with His resurrected power, His energizing passion, His strength, one that can even bring life to a grave. So Jesus responds to Martha by confronting where she's at and saying, yes, He will rise again. And then He gives her this almost confrontational truth in the moment, in the midst of her grief. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever believes in me, believing me, will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who came into the world. After she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. So with Martha, as she comes out and confronts Jesus and offers a plea to Him, He confronts her back with, I am the resurrection and the life. He gives her truth. I am God's presence here and now. But notice the difference of how He responds to Mary when Mary comes out to meet Him from her home. Down in verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw Him, she fell at His feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. An echo of Martha. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. Now notice the difference in terms of how Jesus has interacted with first Martha and then Mary. With Martha, He steps into the flow of Martha's heart, her grief, and confronts it with a truth that is beyond powerful. I am the resurrection and the life, He says. Believe in me. He offers truth. But with Mary, He steps into the flow of her heart and grieves with her, weeps with her. Pastor Timothy Keller has observed that with Martha, He offers truth, and it's in the midst of it all, it's insufficient. And with Mary, He offers tears. In the midst of it all, it's insufficient. You need both. You need truth and tears when going through pain and suffering. You need the truth of who God is, and you need to know that God steps into that pain with you and suffers with you and weeps with you. And it says that in this time here that he's deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Now, what does that mean? That means that it's a difficult word to translate, that deeply moved in spirit. It's used 4 other times in the Gospels, all in relation to Jesus. And it's basically a word that means outrage, indignation. So Jesus is feeling outrage and tears and weeping at the news of Lazarus' death, of grieving with Mary, grieving with the friends. He is offering both truth and He's offering tears, and we need both. One day, either Jenna will be grieving my death or I'll be grieving Jenna's death. And in those moments, we're going to need both those things. We're going to need the truth that He is the resurrection and the life, and with Him we'll live forevermore. And we also need, in that moment, to know that God is a God who weeps alongside us. So, as Jesus is expressing, he says, moved in spirit, he's experiencing outrage and indignation, experiencing tears. Even the New Living Translation translates this verse as a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. But why is Jesus showing all these different facets of himself? Because, why the anger? Why the weeping? Because if you've read the story, you know what happens. Or as I shared earlier, that he raises Lazarus from the dead using just his words. So why is he going through these different motions when the remedy and the solution is right around the corner? Why is he angry? Why is he weeping? Christ's deep emotional turmoil here is more than just one dead person. It's that death was never part of creation. When humanity willfully disobeyed God, sin, death, suffering entered into the pattern of our lives. Death was never supposed to be part of it. And that's where Jesus' outrage, his weeping, comes from. The people observing him question as well. If Jesus is so powerful, why is he weeping? Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the front. "Take away the stone," he said. And as he's doing this, you can hear the foreshadow of Jesus. He knows one day I'm going to be in a cave, and there will be a stone rolled in front of it. But even though Martha thinks, whatever God will listen to Jesus and anything he asks, she does have some protocol that she wants to step in with. She says, "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been in there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Now, if you like Old English, like reading the Old King James Version, this is the best verse to memorize. Because when Jesus asked her to roll away the stone, it says, "But my Lord, he stinketh." So that's the best one that you can go find in the Old English. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out. His hands and feet were wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." And there it is, the glory of God on full display. The simple power of Jesus' 3 words drawing a person from the grave. We don't expect to find life in the grave, but Jesus can bring things alive that we have said are too far gone, are totally dead. This is all found in the life of the energizing, all-powerful, majestic presence of Jesus, who is the resurrection and the life, and asks us to believe that he is that. And you'd expect a few reactions to this amazing event, right? There's people around. This is a public event that Jesus is doing. You'd expect, awe. You'd expect just amazement, people crying in joy. You'd expect people pushing people out of the way to get closer to Jesus and say, "Yeah, I always knew you could do it. I'm going to follow you now," right? But there's also other reactions to it that aren't as in touch with what's going on in the moment. It says this, "Therefore, many of the Jews who came to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees, religious leaders, and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. 'What are we accomplishing?' they asked. 'Here is this man performing many signs,'" meaning miracles. So not all respond in awe and wonder of what Jesus has done. Some go and tattletale on him to the leading priests and Pharisees. And they gather, they have a special meeting, and their response is, what are we accomplishing? Humans focused only on human effort and their own accomplishments. And this is how they start to summarize their decision. It says, if we let him go on like this, Jesus, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. So some people believe in Jesus, this miracle, and others go report him and sets in motion something else in Jesus' life. See, Jesus knows that to stop the grief and the mourning and the pain at Lazarus' tomb is to then set in motion the steps for his own funeral, his own crucifixion, his own burial. Even in the midst of miraculous happening right in front of people, they don't always believe it. They don't always respond the way you think. And it's a reminder to you and me that often we want God to perform the miracle here and now, and we think it's the most effective solution to what we are walking through. And it might not be, which is very deeply hard to accept. God longs for a deep, committed, cultivated connection with each of us. And that doesn't always come about through a miracle of something he's done. It often comes through the stillness, through the quiet, through the slowing down, breathing deeply of his presence. That is where you might discern his voice more clearly than in the profound, unbelievable miracle. He is longing for that deep, cultivated connection, and that often comes through the slowing down and through the stillness. Now, we don't expect to find life in a grave, right? And this is what Jesus brings about. But there is one man who made it very hard to try and prolong his life through his grave. Some of you may have heard of this man. His name is John Milburn Davis. He lived in the early 20th century. And he was a very wealthy Kansas farmer is what he was. Now, John Milburn Davis was married, no kids, and in 1930 his wife died. And people in the town came to him, he was heading into retirement, and they said, what are you going to do with all your wealth? Could you build us a hospital? Could you build us a hospital and a school? Could you build us some parks? Or maybe all of the above, you're that wealthy. And he said no. And he decided to build himself a grave, one that would be for his late wife and for himself. So he started with this. He started with this picture of, he had 7.5 tons of granite covering his grave and his wife's grave on the ground, and he raised a 52-ton slab of granite over top with 6 pillars of granite over it. Then he kept going, spending his money. He thought, okay, I would like to build some Italian marble statues of myself and my wife from our 50th wedding anniversary. So he had those built. But then he liked them so much that he just kept going and ordering more marble statues for his gravesite, depicting them at their 10th anniversary and 20th and 30th, and one where he was clean shaven because he's got to get both his looks in there, right? And he'd pretty much run out of room underneath the pavilion that he built, the canopy, so he kept going. He switched back to granite, and he had a couple of granite statues sitting outside. And this is called the Davis Memorial in Kansas, and he would sit there on the weekends watching tourists come to look at his gravesite. And if they found out this is the guy who's paid for it and it's his wife in the ground, they'd come and ask and talk to him, and he would hand them a business card that all it said on it was, I ask that you please mind your own business. And this Davis Memorial, he said it was for his late wife. But at the end of the time, the amount of statues for his wife were 5. The amount for him were 6. So we know who the memorial's for. When you look at this type of memorial, though, it's nothing that sparks joy, life, inspiration, excitement. It just reminds you of one man's extreme selfishness. It makes no sense to find life in the grave. And for many, it makes no sense to find life, connection, in a relationship with someone who died 2,000 years ago. But we can. And those who follow Jesus do. They find life in his presence, strength for today, peace for the unknowns. And how do we cultivate that deep connection to the one who is the resurrection and the life, the very presence of God who's alive forevermore? I'm going to suggest to you two paths as we close today's message. The first is this, is that to cultivate a deep connection with Jesus, we need to allow him to be who he said he was. Over the last eight or so Sundays of looking at different things that he said in his own words, he said things like, I am the bread of life, I'm the living water, I'm the I am, which is God's presence, I'm the gate, the door, I'm the vine and you're the branches, I'm the good shepherd, and I am the bread of life. I'm the resurrection and the life. He's all these wonderful things. Allow him to be who he said he was. That's first part of cultivating a deep connection with him. And secondly is this, is that allow yourself to trust that he can bring life out of death like he did in this moment. Both for Lazarus and then later for himself, God raised him from the dead. The things that we think are too far gone, maybe in ourselves or in other people or in situations that he can bring back to life. He can make you spiritually alive and vibrant as you walk with him. We may see a lot of suffering in this life. We may feel angry about the brokenness we experience and the fear of what could be. In the midst of those challenges, we need a God who not only offers the truth that he is the resurrection and the life, but also offers us his tears and steps into it and knows that he is weeping with us. Those are two things to help cultivate a deeper connection to the resurrection and the life. Allow him to be who he said he was. And secondly, allow yourself to trust that he can bring life out of something that you have thought dead. As we come to close our message today, if you've never surrendered to this wonderful presence of the God of the universe, the one who calls himself the resurrection and life, the one who invites us to believe in him, today is a wonderful day for doing that. If you're watching or listening online, I'm speaking to you as well. I invite you to pray this in your heart and mind as we close our sermon today, and the words will be up on the screen. Jesus, I have come to believe the words you said about yourself are true. I deeply embrace you as the only one who can forgive my sins through the cross. Help me to live by your resurrection power here and now. In your name, amen.